I went from delivering babies as a midwife to studying medicine. Here's how I did it and how you can too. I trained as a midwife at the University of Surrey and I qualified in the year 2018. I spent a few years working on busy labour wards, managing emergencies and working with families in their most vulnerable moments. And truly it felt like such a privilege being able to be a part of these special moments with these families. After I got my band 6, I started to wonder what was next for me. I really felt a pull towards more clinical responsibility and a broader scope of practice. I remember specifically working on the high dependency unit on labour ward and just being absolutely fascinated with how these doctors would make these plans, because it was beyond my scope of practice at that point. It was talking about the rest of the body beyond the obstetric context. I was so curious about how the mechanisms of these biological processes worked, and I remember I used to go home and research the conditions and the pathophysiology behind how my patients were progressing the way they were progressing. And I remember there was one doctor, Dr. Kim, and she was the first one to plant the seed of, why don't you consider doing medicine? I had previously considered medicine, especially when I was at college, but I never felt that I was clever enough to be able to do it. But the pull and the passion that I felt towards my work and my hunger and drive for wanting more from it truly inspired me to keep going, despite the fact I really truly felt inadequate in that domain. Deciding to leave midwifery wasn't a decision that I took lightly at all. It's an incredible, challenging, amazing job. It's added so much to who I am becoming today, both personally and as a clinician. But over time I realised that I wanted more from my work. I wanted to be able to look at critically unwell patients and assess them accurately and be able to make these plans. I wanted to know of and manage the complexities that happened beyond maternity care. And every day that I went into work and I worked alongside obstetricians and junior doctors and SHOs, I was just in awe and so inspired by each and every single one of them. I started to picture myself doing exactly what they were doing, and it gave me such a warm, accomplished feeling that it really truly felt like medicine was the next step for me. And honestly, it wasn't about leaving midwifery, it was about building on top of it. It was about taking everything I'd learned, from the compassion to the resilience to the complex care, and using it to serve and look after my patients in a different way. Once I'd made the decision to apply to medicine, I had to figure out how to go about doing that. It was in the August that I decided that I would like to apply, and so I only had a couple of months to really get my thoughts together and figure out how to go about doing that. And honestly, it was so overwhelming. I remember reading up about it and thinking, what is UCAT? What is a GAMSAT? What's the BMAT? Why are there so many acronyms? But I figured it out, and I'm going to talk about it in some really simple terms. So as a UK graduate, there are two main routes into medicine. There's either the standard 5-year undergraduate course or the 4-year graduate course. Every course in medicine requires you to sit an entrance exam, whether that's the GAMSAT, the UCAT or the BMAT. Different universities have different requirements. It's important to note before you decide which exam you'd like to take what LC universities are looking for. Some universities in the UK, if you are a graduate with a degree, will not look at your A-levels at all and will just look at your degree. Others will look at a combination of the both, especially if your degree was not science related. Generally in the graduate programs, people come from all walks of life, and therefore they primarily look just at the degree and your score on your entrance exam. That being said, I think it's really important to note that the graduate entry medicine is more competitive than the undergraduate course. It was for this reason that I applied for 3 undergraduate courses and 1 graduate course, just to increase my chances of being able to get onto the program at all. Let's get back to talking about the entrance exams. Personally, I did the UCAT, and the reason for that was because I had very minimal scientific knowledge, biology, chemistry and physics, which the GAMSAT and the BMAT I believe test you on. The UCAT, however, is not an easy exam. I think it might actually be called the UCAT now. I'm not entirely sure. I'm using these terms interchangeably. As I say, I took the UCAT exam. And let me tell you, to me, it was a beast of an exam. It required a lot of stamina, a lot of mental resilience to be able to just get through the exam. Now, I didn't have much time to apply to take the UCAT when I realised that I wanted to go to medical school. So I was trying to fit in bouts of revision whenever I could, in between day shifts, night shifts, half shifts, and everything in between. I always tried to be quite realistic with how well I would do in the UCAT. I knew I was never really at the top of my class in terms of tests and exams. So I really tried to accentuate my strengths in my application, which were things like my work experience, my personality, my drive, as opposed to just the exam score. This also played a huge part in which universities I decided to apply to, just because some will put a higher weighting on the UCAT than others, and some will put a higher weighting on your personal statement. My UCAT actually went better than expected, and I got a slightly higher score than I initially thought I would, which was lovely because it gave me a boost that potentially I could actually get into medicine. After that, I then had to think about my UCAS application and my personal statement, my references, and potentially interviewing for different universities. In my personal statement, I really tried to use real life examples of working within the multidisciplinary team, working alongside patients, advocating for them, and managing emergencies to really highlight how I would fit well into medicine. I knew at interviews they would read my personal statement and ask me questions based on that, so I knew that if I spoke about real life experiences, the answers to these questions would come quite naturally to me. It felt like a lot, and I felt completely in over my head, but I really knew that I would shine when it came to personal statements and the interviews. And after this entire process, it was to my surprise that I actually got in to university, and I was beyond ecstatic. Even now, the whole thing feels a bit surreal. To know that one day I will be a doctor is just the most wonderful feeling, and I can't wait to put in the hard work that it's going to take to get there in these last 2 years. I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about funding, because unfortunately education is not free and it can be a barrier for some people. I think it's really important to be honest and transparent from the get-go, especially if you are considering studying medicine as a graduate. What it comes down to is if you do a second undergraduate degree and you've already taken out a student finance loan, you are not eligible for another tuition fee loan. If you, however, are on a graduate course, I believe there's more access to NHS bursaries and funding that way. You do, however, get a maintenance loan, which personally I put towards my tuition fees. In my first couple of years prior to me turning 25, I think I only received about 3,000 in maintenance, and the rest I had to pay through a mixture of family help and working. However, once you turn 25, you are classed as an independent and therefore are entitled to a higher amount. My maintenance loan now pretty much covers my tuition fees, which has been a huge help in these last few years. If you decide to enroll on a second undergraduate course, the 5th year is paid by NHS bursary. So it is doable, but in reality there are people out there that have mortgages and a family, or in my case a baby, and things can be a little bit tight. It does take sacrifice, however I do believe with planning and living within your means it is doable. Me and my husband like to remind ourselves that this is the most difficult it's going to be for us. Until I start working either full-time or slightly less than full-time, things are going to be a little bit tight, but I truly believe that when I do get to that point it will all be so worth it. So what's it like being a midwife turned medical student? Honestly, it's humbling. You go from someone who is sought after for advice and knowledge to kind of square one again. Years 1 and 2 at my university are primarily theory, so lots of biochemistry, anatomy, pathophysiology, and this was something that I found really challenging. As I mentioned before, I came from a non-science background, and delving in deep into such intricate science was a huge step up for me. I had never really learned anything about molecular pathways at all, and I remember my other graduate friends who had done things like biochemistry felt like this was actually quite easy. It's a really steep learning curve, especially coming from a clinical background as opposed to a science background. At times, I'll be honest, it's frustrating because you are someone that patients trust and look up to take care of them, and all of a sudden you're there sitting exams about cell receptors and metabolic pathways and pharmacology. And there were times in those first couple of years where I thought to myself, why on earth did I think I could do this? You're there talking about how you're struggling to get to grips with these scientific details, all the while thinking, I promise I'm a really good clinician. But honestly, when you get onto the clinical placements, that's where you fly. Your communication skills, your ability to stay calm under pressure, that's where your supervisors will be commenting on how skilled you are in these areas and asking you, are you a graduate? What job did you do before? And that's lovely. It's like the two separate parts of your life are finally coming together. And in honesty, your healthcare experience becomes your secret weapon. You're building on a really strong clinical foundation, and I believe that that makes for a better medical student and one day a better doctor. It is tough, it is tiring, but it is so worth it. And despite how difficult it can be at times, I am loving the process. If you're a midwife or any other healthcare professional that's considering studying medicine, my advice to you is to trust yourself, trust your gut. Studying medicine is one of the best decisions I've ever made for myself. You're not starting from nothing. You have compassion, you have clinical skills, you have the ability to work under pressure, and beyond all of that, you have resilience, and I believe that that is the bread and butter of your medicine. Yes, the exams are tough, and yes, it's a huge commitment of your time, your energy, and your money, but your experience gives you an advantage that you can't teach from scratch. Give yourself the time to study for your entrance exams and get your application spot on. If medicine is in your heart, it is definitely worth the leap.